Welcome to the Dental Brief, the world's direct, right-to-the-point podcast produced to get you the information you need to learn and grow your practice. To learn more about our guests and find links to information discussed on our show, visit our website, dentalbrief.com. On to today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Dental Brief. I am very happy today. We have a great guest from the Pacific Northwest, Lynne Nelson from Practice Management and Associates. Say hello.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
Hey, we're grateful, like I said, to have you here. And what's going to be great about this episode is I know that you specialize or you work in transitions, helping dentists buy and sell practice, but you have a banking background that's pretty unique. Why don't you tell us how you got into dentistry and how that led to you getting into transitions?
Certainly. I started back in the late 90s. I started working for a multi-provider practice. I was a practice administrator, and I did pretty much everything within that practice: hiring, firing. I handled payroll, bookkeeping, everything. So I really got a very nice education on how the business of dentistry runs. So I started there and then kind of hit a ceiling and decided to go out on my own. My practitioner that I worked for, the owner dentist, he started lending me out to some of his friends in his study club, and we went out and showed them what we were doing and how we were doing it, because we were getting really good results. And that led me into consulting, because I really enjoyed equipping doctors with the tools necessary to really reach their goals, from a new patient to a collection to accounts receivable and staffing. I think staffing is a huge issue in dental practices. So from there, I opened a consulting business, Practice Management Associates, with my business partner, Donna Carlson-Lowell, and we started our consulting business and really worked primarily in consulting until about 2000. And in 2000, I had a broker approach me and say, "Lynne, what would you think about coming and working with me? I'll show you the brokerage side, you show me the consulting side, and we'll work together." And so we did that for quite some time. And then the banking crisis occurred back in 2008, and
Sure.
that caught up with brokerage as well. And I decided, well, I wasn't busy enough. I needed something further to do. And I kind of put my feelers out, and all of a sudden, one of the premier lenders that I had worked with so much as a broker reached out to me and said, "What do you think about becoming a banker?"
Sure.
And I thought, why not? So away I went and developed a portfolio of very happy dentists. And I worked throughout the Pacific Northwest. I worked in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana, and developed that portfolio and enjoyed my work there. But I saw such a lack of service, or a lack of level of service within the brokerage field. I just thought, I'm going to go back and get back into that and be a full service broker, because I didn't see a lot of that going on. So that's why I went back into brokerage. But part of the reason why I bring that up is that has really helped me to help buyers and sellers of dental practices understand that banks are looking at this as a business, and it's the business of dentistry. And I really try hard to illustrate what they need to come up with from a selling standpoint to have a bank look at them and say, "Oh, that's a good risk.
Sure.
And this is a good person. I'm going to put those two together, and we're going to lend them the money to do so."
Right. Now, being that you have this, great deal of experience in management, you have the experience in the banking side of things and the transition side of things, the brokerage side of things. I want to dive deep into that banking side, because one thing that people, we do get asked is, why don't we have bankers, on talking about pros and cons and what to avoid and what have you. Bankers are typically very limited in what they can say and even what they can do because of SEC regulations and what have you. So I want to thank you for kind of filling that role and talk to my audience a little bit. It's COVID. We're here in March 2021. This will probably go live in about a month. But tell me what's happening in the banking industry right now and how is that affecting dental practices?
Very good question. A year ago, I would say it was almost exactly a year ago when we were having to close down and dental offices were having to close down. And most banks went dark. It was one of those very eerie moments where you realize you're dead in the water with
Right.
any listing because the dental office isn't seeing patients. And banks are very, very risk adverse anyway, and to have a business closed, there's no potential for getting lending at this point in time. So what we found was there was really one lender during that time that was still offering to do some form of lending, not 100% financing by any stretch, but they were helping to fill a void. And we actually closed a practice during COVID, believe it or not. But nowadays, right now, I would say all of the lenders are beginning to wake back up, and they're definitely. I have several practices that are set to close March, April, and May. And as long as we can provide them the information they need to be able to compare year over year from where they were in 2019 versus where they are today, we're able to still mitigate the downfall that most practitioners experienced as a result of being closed 2 to 3 months.
Sure.
And a lot of people they're not recognizing that yet. But, because in fact, I just talked to someone today about the fact that he wants to sell his second practice, but he doesn't know if it's the right time because he said, I didn't have 2 months of revenue. So I feel like, do I have to work for a whole nother year in order to capture the value that I would have had if COVID had not happened? And I said, absolutely not. Most banks are allowing us to take 2020, divide it by 10 and times it by 12 and annualize that out of what they would have done could they have been open during those 2 months.
Sure.
So you really, as long as you can prove that you're back to where you were before, that's all they want to know. And then they're not fearful of giving you that lending. So,
Sure.
yeah.
Now, how are the banks going to look at practices that took, and let's say the PPE loans, let's say they've been, PPP loans
Uh-huh.
have been forgiven. What about the SBA loans? How is that going to come into play? Is it going to look like any typical type of debt that a practice came on and that debt would just come off the balance sheet, or what's that going to look like?
Yes. The PPP loans, we definitely have them get their forgiveness paperwork in and have that forgiven ahead of time. We suggest that they don't plan to close until the forgiven, that they are forgiven.
Right.
And then with the EIDL loans, those loans were, long-term loans, and they do have liens against the practices. So those will have to be paid at closing.
Got it.
Yep.
So
Yep.
let me ask you this question too, and this is for our practices that are considering our younger dentist or any age dentist for that matter that's looking at buying a practice. And I know that we're kind of short on time, but what are some things that they should start to do to get in order to look at getting ready for financing, and how soon before they think they may want to buy a practice or take out a loan to buy a practice should they really start working on getting their finances in order to make sure they get that speedy approval and that low interest rate they so That's
Right. Well, we actually go into some of the dental schools and talk to the students before they even get out about making sure that they're making good choices financially, paying their bills, not taking on a lot of revolving debt, not over purchasing, because all of that will set them up for their future practice loan. Because
true.
bankers, they're going to look at that. They're going to look at what their financial choices are. So that's the first thing we say is, really do not go and start, getting lots of credit card debt. Student loan debt, that's no problem. The banks don't look at that as a huge issue. That will come into play when you purchase the practice. The practice has to give you the cash flow to cover the debt service after your overhead, and be able to take care of your personal obligations. So if you have 500,000 in student loans or more, then you're going to have to buy a bigger practice.
Sure.
So, but another thing that you can do besides keeping your revolving debt down, and maybe don't purchase a house until you're ready and you know where you're going to be located.
Right. Makes sense.
Yep. The other things that you can do, I don't think it's ever too soon to meet with a couple, 2, 3 lenders. I think that, you get more than 3 in the mix, and then you're going to just get overwhelmed and not know how to make the right decision.
Right. That makes
But
sense.
I would get 3 good dental lenders. Don't walk into a branch, but actually reach out to somebody who has a healthcare division, meet with them, let them know, hey, I'm going to start looking around. Personally, I like to see a buyer look at a few practices. Don't buy the first thing that you see, because you need to get used to measuring practices. And to
Right.
me, I love working with buyers who have looked at a lot of other practices, because they know what they're looking for. They know how to look at the bottom line. They know kind of the type of procedures that they want to do, maybe procedures they want to add to that business, or, things that they can't do, they're going to stay away from. If they don't like oral surgery and there's a lot of oral surgery, they may not go in that direction unless they
Right.
can pick up some other procedures. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. So tell me this, and I know we won't pray, and I know you're a banker for a long time, or quite some time. Tell me, what's one what's one fatal mistake that you see in accepting a loan or signing up for a loan that practices make that they really need to go out of their way to avoid?
I need clarification. Do you mean?
So in other words, what is kind of a trap, or what is one of the pitfalls that, maybe some banks, maybe they're not one of the more popular banks, but they there's prepay penalties,
Oh, got it. Yeah,
that
yeah.
sort of thing, requirements. What are some types of things that you see dentists, sign up for, and you're like, oh man, I wish they had avoided that.
Right. Definitely prepayment penalties can be an issue. Even, a lot of times they'll say, some of the bigger banks will say, oh, well, it's only for 3 years. Well, there's a lot that can happen financially over a 3-year period. So you can't always say, oh, well, it's only 3 years, because there could be some things that happen in our economy that would make it necessary for you to refinance. Or you could have a life event that would
Sure.
make it necessary for you to refinance. And then you're stuck with this prepayment penalty, which is outlandish. So a lot of the banks there's plenty of banks out there, community banks, smaller banks, regional banks that don't have those types of prepayment penalties. They do a lot of times too. Their teaser rates they'll offer. Oh, for 1 year you only have 1% interest. But
Right.
read between the lines and read the fine print. That's what I always say. And when I'm working with buyers, I always ask them, "Hey, send me your term sheet. Let me look it over. I can at least give you some ideas and point you in the right direction." The biggest thing for me with talking with a buyer about a lender is, what kind of lending resource do you want? Do you want a 1-800 number to call? Do you not care about having a relationship with a banker? Because then you're fine going with maybe the bigger bank that, has a high turnover rate, and you're going to have an 800 number literally
Sure.
when you're having issues. But if you want, a lender that understands your business model, yes, you might pay a little bit more for that. It shouldn't be a lot more than that, but it's worth its weight, and especially during times like we've just been through, with COVID and the urgent needs that were met by a lot of these banks. So.
Yeah. Lynne, thank you so much for coming on today. I want to just tell our audience one more time your website address is practicemanagementassociates.org. Lynne Nelson, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode. Did you know you can weigh in on today's topic on Facebook? Search The Dental Brief on Facebook or visit our website, dentalbrief.com, and just follow the link. We look forward to having you join us again on another episode of The Dental Brief.